Thank you for joining us at FundForum. Very interesting time, a lot of insights on where the asset management industry is. I'm here today with Michel from Thomas Watson. Can you explain a bit more your role actually, and what's basically the trend you've seen, especially in emerging markets?
Okay, my role at Thomas Watson is advising a variety of clients with their investment portfolio. This is quite diverse. These are sovereign wealth funds, endowments, foundations, pension funds, also family offices. And it's giving advice on helping them on structuring the portfolio, making their investments better and increase the efficiency of their investments. So regarding emerging markets have always been, since the last couple of decades, quite an important topic and also present in a number of portfolios. But what we see is that the weight of emerging markets in funds of all kinds is still quite low in comparison to the economic situation in the world.
Do you have some data there, just to explain how it has evolved in the last years? What would be the typical percentage of investment in emerging market, let's say for UK pension funds?
Yeah, UK pension funds is quite interesting because they had traditionally a lot of their assets in equities. That has evolved over time. But when you looked in detail in the composition of this equity exposure, it was very dominantly composed by domestic equities. Emerging markets have found their way in those portfolio only quite recently and gradually. First of all, and this is not only for the UK, but also globally this is the case, funds have been moving towards an exposure to emerging market equities as a first step. This is not necessarily the best way of capturing the growth of emerging markets, but it's the most easy way probably.
Learning curve, yeah.
And the learning curve have evolved from exposure in equities towards emerging market debts, and more recently also currency and alternative assets.
Okay, so how, if you're first time or you're moving, you want to increase your exposure in emerging markets, what are the different accesses you have? What would you see as a growing trend there?
An exposure to emerging wealth as a team should be, in our view, composed by different asset classes. Equities is definitely part of that, but it's not the only one. Having exposure to the depth of emerging countries is quite important, and you can do that through hard currencies or local currencies, probably a mixture of both. But the purest way of accessing the wealth creation in a country is to get exposure to their currency. And currently, when you're looking at the economic figures, the situation in Asia is quite interesting because those currencies are quite undervalued in comparison to the rest of the world.
And there, would you say that the majority of the investors you're talking to have the knowledge yet, or you just depend on a lot of your advisors, for example? How would they approach this?
A lot of investors are using external advice, and there it's interesting because you can go a step further and help them in structuring the portfolio in the right way. However, what we see is that a vast majority of investors are accessing emerging wealth only through their global equity exposure, for instance, without having a dedicated portion of their portfolio to emerging market equities or emerging market debts.
Okay. My last question, Michel, would be regarding risk, because emerging markets have always been perceived as relatively risky assets. How would you address that issue with your clients?
It's clear that we have seen in the past quite a lot of volatility in emerging markets, but this is also true for other markets, and more recently I think It is probably wrong to say that emerging markets is by far most risky in comparison to developed markets, for instance. There is a lot of volatility in markets overall, and emerging markets is a part of a diversified portfolio.
Excellent. Well, many thanks again for this insight. I think
pleasure.
it's definitely something to follow up, and we keep you in touch. Thank you.